Welcome to A Million Ways to Live. I'm Chris. I'm here as always with my co-host Cassie. We're going to dive into, explore, dissect a million different ways to live a good life. It should be fun. The show and life, they should both be fun. Hi.
Hi, Chris.
What's going on?
Not much. Happy Friday.
Yeah, days of the week have no meaning anymore.
When you're being a Stoic?
No, I don't think it has to do with Stoicism. Maybe that's a lesson I missed in there. But, so we're talking about a book and a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
The book is A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy by William B. Irvine. Did you come across anything about William B. Irvine? Or just the book?
Just the book.
So you'll be surprised to learn that he lives in Dayton, Ohio.
What?
Yeah.
Huh.
And to anybody listening that doesn't know, we work in Ohio. So that's why that's relevant. But yeah, he's the professor of philosophy at Wright State University. Lives in Dayton, Ohio. Has written 7 books. This one, as well as another one on Stoicism called The Stoic Challenge, which I have read that one. I'll tell you about that. He's written for Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post, Salon, Time, and the BBC. Right from little old Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
I hate Dayton, Ohio.
No offense to anyone that lives in Dayton, Ohio.
None at all. I used to have to drive up to Dayton, Ohio on a regular basis for work. And it was always in the not so good parts of Dayton, Ohio. So that's the only image I have is the daily trips from an hour away to go to Dayton, Ohio.
To not do something fun.
Yeah. If one were to try to present Dayton in its worst, they would have you drive from an hour and a half away and go to the parts of Dayton that I went to.
Right.
So not a fair representation, but nonetheless, it has tinged my opinion of Dayton. Okay. So, A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. To maybe start before the book, because this book is all about Stoicism, which is it's kind of like being a vegan these days, or, adopting a dog from the pound. Like people talk about it in an annoying way. And actually he talks about it in this book because it's trendy. Being a Stoic has become kind of.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it has been for years.
Huh.
So there's the writer Ryan Holiday. He is fairly responsible for him and Tim Ferriss actually are responsible for bringing Stoicism to the zeitgeist, bringing it to current people, or at least for repopularizing it in some way. So Ryan Holiday has written several books about it. One is The Obstacle is the Way.
You've read that, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he usually packages books, Ryan Holiday. He takes a Stoic idea and kind of titles the book in an intriguing way that kind of obfuscates the fact that it's a book about Stoicism. It doesn't say The Obstacle is the Way, a book about Stoicism. It says The Obstacle is the Way. It might have a subtitle. I hope I'm not wrong on that. I don't think it has a subtitle that mentions Stoicism, but that's generally what he does. He takes an idea from Stoicism. He's not trying to pawn it off as his own thing. He's very, in the books, he does go into Stoic philosophers and where these ideas come from, but he repackages them. And that's something that, this is towards the end of the book, that Irvine goes into about the decline of Stoicism and some reasons for that. And I'm not sure, did you notice when this book was written?
I did not.
Let me look that up real fast.
Felt recent. Just
Felt recent?
Yeah.
Based on what?
The
You want to guess?
2004.
Close. 2009.
Okay. So that's what I mean. It felt like it didn't feel like it was written in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I didn't know if you meant recent, like in the last 5 years.
No, I guess last 20 years. Recent.
Okay. Yeah, 2009. So, what was your opinion of the book overall?
Overall?
Yeah.
Like, did I like it? Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was broken up well. Like the first third of the book talked about the original Stoics, from Greek Stoicism to Roman Stoicism, and kind of talked about a few big figures. So it gave you that nice background. If you had no idea, the history of Stoicism, it kind of laid the foundation well. And then it went into each of the ideas that the Stoics follow. And then it summed it up by saying, if you want to practice Stoicism, here's how to go about doing it.
Yeah, very practical book.
Yes, very practical, but engaging because it was like short chapters. So, it didn't feel like you're reading this massive manual on some philosophy. Like that was just like overwhelming. He broke it up nicely into short chunks. So you could be like, okay, today we're talking about negative visualization. Tomorrow we're talking about the trichotomy of, control. Thank you. So I appreciated the way it was written.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's very well organized and packaged up nicely so that you can
digest it.
Quickly grasp an idea, then move on to the next one without a lot of fluff that's unnecessary. So perhaps because maybe everybody doesn't know what Stoicism is, pretty sure everybody doesn't know what Stoicism is.
Let's start there.
It's a philosophy. It was founded by Zeno of Citium, Citium, Citium.
Sure. Yeah.
In the early 3rd century BC or BCE. Did you know we're calling it BCE now?
No, before Christ.
That's BCE.
What's the E?
It's changes C to common, and E is era. So before common era.
Oh.
To kind of
take away the religious aspect of breaking up time?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
cool.
Call it what you will, but something I learned just looking that up. Early 3rd century BCE. The general gist of Stoicism here is it teaches the development of virtue and wisdom as a path to true happiness. Stoicism provides a framework for leading a good and fulfilling life through the cultivation of personal virtues and the practice of reason. Sound about right?
It does. I'm surprised the word tranquility wasn't in there because that was a big theme of the book.
Well, he goes into that because this book has some criticism.
Okay.
In the world of Stoic philosophers, because it is considered an interpretation of Stoicism, not a direct translation. It takes some modern liberties. It tries to take what they for example, the dichotomy of control.
Yeah,
is what it was actually called.
He turned it into the
He said that doesn't completely make sense. So the dichotomy of control, the idea of that is that people either have control over something or no control over something. So control over other people's opinions of you, or no control over other people's opinions of you. Or he uses the example of playing tennis.
Yes, he does.
Do you have control over winning the tennis game, or do you have no control? And his point is, the Stoics called it the dichotomy of control, but it's really the trichotomy of control because there's a third option in there. You do have some control over whether you win the tennis match or not. Yeah. You can practice. You can do all of these things. You can, build up your body and endurance and strength. And there's a lot of things that you can do to make it more likely that you'll win the tennis match, but you do not have complete control. So he puts it as the trichotomy of control because there's things you have some, but not complete control over. Some things you have complete control over, which he uses the example of your values. You have complete control over choosing your values.
Your goals.
And the goals you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's things you have no control over whatsoever. So there's really 3 categories. And that's one of the things that people critique about the book, because that's not, whether he agrees with it or not, that's not what the Stoics were teaching. They were teaching the dichotomy of control. And so that's maybe it's valid, maybe it's not a valid critique. Go ahead.
I don't think it's a valid critique, because he comes right out and says that. He says, I'm not writing a handbook completely based off of the original Stoic philosophy. I'm interpreting it for the modern day reader. So he has that caveat in there a few times. So to critique him for doing what he said he's doing.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the angle you're coming from with your criticism. If you're right, he's very open about what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's not a trick by any means. But for whatever reason, that's one of the criticisms, that it is considered more of a translation. But generally speaking, just looking at feedback on the book from people interested in Stoicism, is that it's very well received. It's considered a great introduction to somebody interested in practicing Stoicism.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. It's if you're looking for more of a history on Stoicism, it's not the best book.
No, that's like the quick first little part, gives you enough history to understand it.
Enough to understand it, but
boring
not
you.
Yeah, enough to understand it and then put it into practice.
Yeah.
Not enough to write a complete history of Stoicism.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, why is tranquility not in the definition that I gave? And he kind of touches on that too. So that's the other, he tried to pick the most practical presentation of Stoicism. And he points out that he's focusing on the Roman Stoics rather than the Greek Stoic philosophers. And the Greek Stoic philosophers were more focused on attaining virtue, which is considered, they kind of break it down into wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation are the things that encapsulate virtue. And he points out too that a lot of the words that they use, such as virtue and tranquility and logic and physics, are not the same. They don't have the same meaning as today's modern definition of those words.
Yeah.
So that's why virtue, if I asked you what is virtue, you probably wouldn't say, well, that's wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation.
I might.
You'd probably just say that virtue is being a good person, but that's not the exact meaning that the Stoic philosophers had for it. So the Greek philosophers focused on virtue. The Roman philosophers found it more useful to focus on tranquility. And so depending on, where you get your definition, they're not looking at the definition of Stoicism through the William B. Irvine book. They're more looking at it historically, which it started out with more of a focus on virtue.
Got it.
Tranquility was in there, but that became more of a focus when the Roman philosophers came into it. Which the Roman philosophers, the most famous ones and the ones that are talked about in this book, are Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor, Seneca, who was a bunch of things, a playwright. I think he was he was an advisor to the emperor. Epictetus, who was born a slave, and eventually was freed and became a Stoic philosopher. And then Musonius Rufus, who I don't know a lot about him. I know more about Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. I've read their books. Maybe Rufus was one of the ones that none of his writings survived, because there's a lot of Stoic writings that are gone. They're lost. So
they're 2,000 plus years old.
Yes. And so that's the other thing that's kind of, I don't know, really cool about Stoicism so Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. considered to be, at that time, the most powerful person in the world.
Wasn't he like the last of the great emperors? Wasn't that kind of
good, like as in like morally good?
Yeah.
Is my understanding.
Okay.
The reason we know his teachings or thoughts or approaches or practices on Stoicism are simply because he kept a personal journal, a daily personal journal where he wrote to himself. It was never intended to be published. No one else was supposed to read it. It was just solely for his own benefit to work on himself. So after his death, somebody got a hold of that and shared it with the world.
Because of his status, which is interesting when talking about Stoicism, because had he just been Marcus Aurelius off the street and had this journal, it would have never probably been found and shared with the world. But since he was an emperor, people took interest in it.
Yeah. But one must ask, what would he be doing if he was an emperor? Would he be just, on the, because Stoic, the word Stoicism comes from the word stoa, because stoa means porch, and they used to do philosophy on this place called the Stoa, which was like the porch. That's where it came from. So maybe Marcus Aurelius, if he was an emperor, would be hanging out on the Stoa with Seneca and Epictetus.
Maybe, yeah.
And had kept a journal anyway, and because he was a philosopher among the other philosophers, we would have found it anyway. I don't know. But yes, it is really cool that we ended up getting Marcus Aurelius's personal journal. And in it, he's just every day telling himself, like, prepare for this, prepare for that, and using Stoic principles to just guide his thoughts.
Have you read that?
I've read, it's called Meditations. And that's why it's so good that this book exists, because there's amazing information and practical stuff in Meditations, but it's much harder to read.
That was my question. If you've read it, like, just the way they spoke and there's multiple course of writing, like, ooh.
Well, there's multiple interpretations of it too.
Okay.
Or translations of it, rather.
Yeah.
So there's, I can't remember which one that most people recommend, but I got that one, and it's as accessible as it can be, while maintaining, the
integrity of
what he was saying. Yeah, with trying not to take too many interpretive, modernizing the language or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just to kind of touch on what Stoicism is and the angle that this book comes at it from. So part 1, he talks about the history of Stoicism, and then part 2 jumps right into the Stoic psychological techniques. And the first one is negative visualization, one that some people might consider too grim to try in some ways.
Yeah, and he, skipping ahead, he says that's the first one you should start practicing should you want to try to become a Stoic, is negative visualization. So
explain what that is.
If you can't stomach it, then Stoicism might not be for you. It is thinking about losing the things you love the most, the things and people that you love the most. And the idea behind thinking, you're making a face at me.
I disagree with your definition.
Oh.
But go ahead.
That's very clearly how I understood it.
Wait, you said thinking about things you love the most.
Losing things you love the most.
Right. Well, I don't think it has to be done with the things you love the most. It can be done with anything. It can be...
Oh.
So, I don't think it's necessary to only use it for the things you love the most.
Well...
I don't think that's useful.
Okay.
Take that part out.
He often talks about thinking about losing your children.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying you can't use it on the things you love the most,
okay.
But it's not solely for the things you love the most.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that's how I interpreted it. And doing that for the purpose of learning to appreciate them more and not take things for granted. So instead of I feel like maybe you think I'm just wrong, so you should explain it.
No, only on that part. You're fine. So yes, it is thinking about anything that you care about
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily the most. That's all I was trying to
Okay.
make the distinction of. So maybe you really enjoy um, your coffee in the morning
Yeah.
and just considering suddenly not having access to coffee. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's some, COVID comes back and supply chain issues make it so that we just can't get coffee in America for a month. And you just imagine not having that coffee, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes you appreciate the coffee.
I think it works more for things that you care about deeply.
It probably is more effective for the things you care about more deeply. I don't know why you're arguing with me
Oh,
on this subject. It's
I
definitely not only for the things you care about the
okay.
most. It's just not.
Got it. Okay.
However, it probably is much stronger to use. It's much stronger of a tool to use it for something like your family or your spouse
Yeah.
or a job.
Yeah.
So that's a great example. A job. You might really care about your job, but care about the most. Yeah, that's all.
Okay.
I might want that job more, and I would care more about that job
Mm-hmm.
if I had it, but I want to appreciate the job that I have. So I'm going to use negative visualization to appreciate the job that I have, and imagine like, well, if I didn't have this, all of these, challenges would be introduced into my life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I really want that job. I'm going to continue striving for this better job. I don't really like this job.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I want to use negative visualization to appreciate the job so that's all. I think it's an important distinction because it can be used on things that people might say, well, I don't care about that the most in my
Right.
life. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, effective idea.
Do I believe it's an effective idea? Yes, I do. I had said to you, like, I think I'm already a Stoic. I do that anyway, but not with the intention of trying to appreciate the things I have more. I think it's more of just I get a terrible idea in my head and it makes me really sad. Like thinking about losing you or the kids or our house or, so the things that are really important to me, I
More
like.
fear than.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that part of negative visualization is like, I mean, I, can you do it without having some like element of fear?
I don't know. I mean, can you? Maybe.
Maybe that's what I was thinking about. Like, as I was kind of listening to the book in the car, I'm like, okay, he says he does it sometimes while he's driving to work. And I'm like, do I want to think about these terrible things while I'm driving to work? I don't know. Like, what if I start crying in the car? And what if it starts me off on a bad foot for the day because I've already put myself through trying to think about experiencing a major loss, So,
Yeah, I think like anything, you have to try it out and find the way that it works for you.
mhm.
And maybe, yeah, don't do it on the way into work when you're going to have a meeting and thinking about, not having your children tomorrow. It can be upsetting, of course.
Yeah.
Um, So I don't know. Maybe you have to find the right time to do it, and maybe you have to find the right time to do each thing. So maybe on the way to work, don't think about the grimmest of losses. Maybe
Think
think
about the
about
coffee.
losing the job. You're on
Yeah.
your way to work. You
Okay.
want to have a good attitude at work.
Yeah.
Then maybe think about not having that job. I don't know. I think a lot of people are probably saying, "Well, all I think about is not having my job because I hate my job." How is that going to,
You have to think about the things
you
your
have to
job
think about the
provides.
good things
And
that it brings to your life.
yes,
Yeah.
there has to be some positive things, relationships with people that you work with, or the financial element of, having a steady paycheck.
Mhm.
You can find good things in almost any job, I would think.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, negative visualization, just thinking about things that you care about
Mm-hmm.
or that you want to appreciate
Mm-hmm.
and think about how life would be not having the good aspects of those things. If there's something like a job that has negative aspects, and just think about not having it, and that helps you appreciate it. Pretty much it.
I can get behind that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you plan to use this intentionally, not in a wait for the fear to strike way, but in a like more of a
intentional way?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Cool. The next one was one we already kind of talked about, which was the dichotomy of control. Title of that chapter is The Dichotomy of Control on Becoming Invincible.
I would like to say that this was by far my least favorite chapter.
Why?
Because I think the book was really well written, and I'm not sure that I could have written this chapter better myself, but it used the same series of words over and over to the point of exhaustion. Like, these are the things that you have control. These are the things that you have some control, but not complete control. And it was almost robotic in the way that it used the words over and over again. So.
Yeah.
And the tennis match. Oh boy, if I had to hear one more time about the amount of control you have over winning this tennis match, it was just really repetitive. But it drove the point home, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've said pretty much all there is. I mean, not all there is to say, but it is a powerful idea. We talked about the serenity prayer in another episode. Which one was that? Nihilism. Yeah, just learning to know the difference between the things you can control and the things you can't control, and not letting the things that you can't control
take up space,
stress you out,
energy. Yeah, like the big one was you cannot control if the sun will rise tomorrow, so why worry about it?
Right.
I mean, nothing you can do.
There was something else I had to say about that. The dichotomy of control. Things you have control over and things you don't. I don't remember what it is, so we're going to move on. Okay. Next chapter was fatalism. Letting go of the past, ... and the present. Did you grasp the idea of fatalism? Because I felt like that was...
I feel like the title
he
of
moved
that
over
chapter
that quickly.
Is misleading because I thought it was more, not dwelling on the past was a big part of it. So letting go of the past and not kind of the same thing, not spending your energy worrying about things that have happened that you cannot change. Also not spending too much time on the future, like worrying about it. That was...
Well, I think the other thing that we talked about in another episode was the idea, which he doesn't say this term in the book that I recall, but amor fati, which is a Stoic idea, love of fate. Hence the fatalism, which it just means accepting life as it is.
Yeah.
It really goes back to the dichotomy of control, but it's the letting go of the past is accepting the good and the bad of your past and not dwelling on it. We talked about not dwelling on if you feel like you're a victim in life.
Yeah.
And how it does you a disservice to embody that as, your whole personality of, being a victim and accepting life as it came to you and understanding it is what it is and you don't have control over that, nor do you have complete control over the present. And I think that's where the rest of that title of the chapter comes in, and accepting circumstances, work toward controlling the future outcomes that you can, the tennis match, do what you can, practice for tennis. But he talks about the goal of the tennis match should be to play your best, not to win the game, because you don't have complete control over whether or not you win the game. You do have complete control over if you play your best or not.
Right.
Self-denial was the next chapter, on dealing with the dark side of pleasure.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that one?
When we had gone camping a few times this summer, you were like, it's good to be uncomfortable. And that's kind of
it is.
The main idea behind this is if you are just if everything's easy and comfortable and you have the best foods and the best clothes and everything all the time, you don't appreciate it, for one. And two, when you lose it, or if you lose it, it's that much harder to deal with because it's all you've ever known. That's all you're used to. So doing things to practice being uncomfortable from time to time are good for you.
Yes, Seneca talks about from time to time, dressing in, I can't remember the exact quote and how he put it, but
and something clothes.
Basically wear dingy old clothes with holes in them from time to time. Sleep on the ground. Just do things to show you that if everything goes poorly and you just have to wear, thrift store clothes and you don't have a bed for a while and you got to sleep on the couch,
you'll make it.
You'll be okay.
Yeah.
And see that it's not so bad, or it's not the end of the world, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's see. He said they talked about, so that's where I think hedonic adaptation comes in.
Yeah. This was good with the food. And I thought about us a lot because we jokingly sort of say that we're food snobs, because we like good food and
coffee snobs.
And coffee snobs. But it starts out, I think he used macaroni and cheese as the example. Like, let's just say in college, you were happy to have that bowl of Velveeta mac and cheese. It was great. And then after you're out of college, you're like, oh, I'd rather have this fettuccine Alfredo. It's a little better. And then he goes on to use, a risotto with confit tomatoes. And I don't know exactly, but I feel like we've gotten to that far end where we're like, oh, we like the best of the best when it comes to food. And so the hedonic adaptation, you just get used to better and better, and then it's hard to go back.
Yeah, the Stoics, I think, specifically recommend not becoming a connoisseur of anything.
Yeah.
So if you become a coffee connoisseur, then one day you don't have your access to your good coffee and you have to get Folgers from the grocery store. No offense to Folgers. Then it's going to be a miserable experience for you.
Right.
How can anybody drink this swill? And so take that for what you want. I'm still going to drink good coffee. I don't know.
But occasionally, do you think you should have something
occasionally
less
we
good
do. We go on a trip and all you have is whatever kind of coffee the hotel is serving in the lobby. Yeah. It is what it is. I mean, yeah, you can tell the difference. And I would definitely in that moment say, if someone offered me a substitute with our normal coffee, I would gladly pour the hotel coffee down the drain and take the other one. But yeah, we survive. And so I guess from time to time, life forces us into doing that. But yeah, maybe we can work on that. The food one, it's not, I mean, I'm more...
How much time do we have?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur of food, first of all, by any means. I just want good ingredients, whereas, the American food system is pretty jacked up.
Yeah.
And what rando chemical is in,
You're happy with simple food
made
from
simple
good quality ingredients. Yes.
So
the mac and cheese example isn't exactly us, but
yeah. Agreed. And then, so still on part 2, the Stoic psychological techniques, the next chapter is meditation, watching ourselves practice Stoicism. And in this one, he draws the distinction that what they're calling meditation is not the popularized idea of like mindfulness, breath meditation that people think of today. This is more of just reflecting on your day, much in the way that Marcus Aurelius did in his journal, and at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, writing down, either setting your mind to be prepared for encountering, challenging people, and predetermining how you're going to react when you encounter a rude or difficult...
He used the word annoying a lot. Just
annoying
straight
person.
Up annoying.
And then at the end of the day, assessing how stoic you were and where you could have done better. And
Yeah.
that's what they mean by meditation, is really just reflecting. It's like it seems like a necessary and practical piece of advice for anyone that actually wants to practice stoicism. How do you do that? Well, you do the best you can throughout the day, keeping these ideas in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, you look back and say, okay, I was not stoic when dude cut me off on the highway. I was not stoic when somebody shot my idea down in a meeting. Or I was stoic when I did this, or was stoic when I did that.
Yeah.
And reflecting on all of that and giving yourself feedback so that you can continue doing the things you're doing right, or
work on the things
that you're not doing so well. Any other takeaways from the meditation part?
I think that's a good summary.
And I think that mostly came as advice from Seneca. I know you had something you mentioned, I don't know, a few days ago about the Marcus Aurelius preparing himself for annoying people.
Yeah.
You said you had some thoughts on that?
Oh, how I just thought you should do that every day.
Oh.
I was sort of joking, but, when you find the habits and things that other people, strangers do, annoying, just learning to yep, this is gonna happen. This is gonna be part of my day, part of my life. Other people will continue to annoy me forever. And to think about how you aren't special. You annoy people. You just don't realize it. So
I'm talking about me specifically.
I'm talking about you specifically, Chris. No, I think it's good advice for everyone, but I just thought of you when I was listening to that chapter.
So Marcus Aurelius' specific quote on that, he says, "Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil."
Yeah, it's not their fault. They're just ignorant to what is good or evil. So you can't hate the annoying person.
Everybody's ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
It's a funny quote. I mean, when you take it from, it's like, you're obviously not as bad as Marcus Aurelius there. He's like, just tell everyone's trash. I'm just going to have to deal with it.
Well, as a Roman emperor, I guess you got to give him props. I mean, you definitely have to give him props, because with that much power, I think a lot of Roman emperors were really horrible, murdering.
Oh, yeah. He could have just killed the annoying people, but he just said, I'm going to have to deal with them today. Here we go. The
next section is Stoic advice. And there's 11 chapters in this section. We won't run through each of them individually. I'll read the list of them. Let me know if there's any that you had any, takeaways on.
Okay.
So the chapters are duty, on loving mankind.
That's that one, the annoying
chapter. Yeah, that's where all that came in. How did we get to that?
I don't know.
Oh, because we were talking about meditation and writing in your journal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's what Marcus Aurelius did to help himself
love mankind.
Mm-hmm. And it's really the next section too, because what's the difference between duty on loving mankind and then the next chapter, social relations on dealing with other people?
Yeah, they're very related.
On loving mankind, I know they talk about how, we living in accordance with nature, and we're social beings, and so, it is in our nature to care and love about each other, I think is effectively the idea there.
Yeah.
And then, social relations on dealing with other people. That's where the Marcus Aurelius preparing himself for annoying people in life. Insults on putting up with put downs. They give some advice on
laugh it off.
Yeah. What do you do when somebody insults you?
Sure. Yeah. Oh,
I mean, it's pretty, again, very
it's effective.
Practical and effective. So yeah, they say either hit it with humor, react to it with humor, or ignore it.
Yeah.
These are the two big ones.
I feel like that's what we tell our kids, like most parents, like if someone's being mean to you or bullying you, ignore them, so.
And maybe we missed a little, this makes me think of another overarching Stoic idea that we didn't specifically call out, because Stoicism has it's a commonly misunderstood philosophy, because most people that don't know anything about it and just hear the word Stoic or Stoicism, they think of unemotional,
no feelings,
and that is not the idea. The Stoics are very much about trying to maximize good emotions, but the idea is to minimize or eliminate negative emotions. So that's where what comes in on the insults chapter is, don't let the insult create negative emotions in you. Laugh it off or ignore it. And I think they actually I think I wrote this one down. They have a example, or maybe this wasn't a Stoic example. This might have been a William B. Irvine example. He says, when a dog barks, we might make a mental note that the dog in question appears to dislike us, but we would be utter fools to allow ourselves to become upset by this fact, to go through the rest of the day thinking, oh dear, that dog doesn't like me. So why would you care what any random person?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that you don't have complete control over. Another one on the subject of caring what others think of us. It's about retaining freedom, because the Stoics were about maintaining personal freedom, not giving other people freedom over us. Epictetus says, if we wish to retain our freedom, we must be careful while dealing with other people to be indifferent to what they think of us, because to care what other people think gives that person power over you. So I thought that was a good piece of advice.
Yeah.
Grief was the next chapter. It's just advice on how to deal with grief.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I think some people might take offense to this, way of dealing with grief, because he's pretty much like, it should be kind of short and sweet. Like, you cannot let this be the rest of your life, just because something tragic happens, or, you can't grieve it forever.
Yeah.
And it's just not healthy to do so, is what they say. And I think later in the book, they talk about the common belief that if you don't grieve something properly, then you'll have it delayed down the road. You'll still delayed grief. Yeah. He said that's not really a thing. Like, in studies that have happened, like, people don't experience delayed grief.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I don't have any other scientific research to go off of on that one, but I mean, I think who wants to go through life sad and, constantly grieving? I mean, it makes sense, but easier said than done, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of pushback on this part of the book, and it's part of Stoicism. But, well, first of all, the main piece of advice for grief is to prepare for it using negative visualization. Because if you're doing a regular negative visualization practice, then at the loss of someone, you're prepared for that, and your grieving will be less extreme and shorter. That's
because it's not some total shock to your system, because
you've prepared
you've thought
your
about
mind.
Yeah.
And you've hopefully loved, spent time, appreciated that person more through life because you were using negative visualization. So
then you won't have the regrets that also often come along with grief.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's surely a percentage of people that it becomes more about them and their wound from losing a person, and grief becomes this attention that people don't want to let go of. I think that's probably a pretty regular occurrence.
Yeah.
And
not everyone,
not disproportionately more, but I'm sure that is normal and regular. I have no idea frequency, percentage of how many people going through grief turn that into something focused on themselves, but I'm sure that happens a lot. And I think that's part of this, is careful not to internalize this and make it about you.
Yeah. It goes along with kind of the past thing, like you're, dwelling on past events, like making yourself out to be the victim. Like, it doesn't really serve you in the future to be constantly in the past. Yeah.
Next chapter was anger. And I know Seneca has a book I don't know if he wrote it as a book or an essay, back in whenever, but it was called On Anger.
Mm-hmm.
I have not read that, but I am aware of it. Then there's 2 chapters on personal value, one on seeking fame and one on luxurious living.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of different approach from the Stoics on luxurious living, at least, whereas some of the philosophers would say that avoid it at all costs. It's poison to some degree, whereas Marcus Aurelius was obviously
Mm-hmm.
lived luxuriously as a Roman emperor, and then Seneca was also wealthy by most standards, and they both agreed that you have to be careful about that and not let it lead to all of the things we already talked about, like the connoisseurness, being a connoisseur, and then wearing, the dingy clothes and sleeping on the floor or a couch from time to time. So just don't let it become something that you rely on.
Yeah. Something that defines you.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk about exile.
Yeah. Which I liked how he turned it into modern day. What does that mean? Because we're not going to be exiled to a desolate island.
So that's what used to happen in the Roman philosophers and Greek philosophers' time, whereas at certain points in history, they literally banished all philosophers and would literally just ship them off to an island. And here's where you have to stay. You're in exile on this island.
You can't come back.
And that doesn't really happen anymore. So Irvine compared that to being exiled to a nursing home in old age.
Yeah.
And how he drew the similarities between the two things and how you can
make the most of your exile.
Most of it. Yeah. And he gave the examples of the philosophers that were exiled on how they carried on being happy people and said, okay, this is my circumstance now. And it's really another back to all of the other ideas.
Finding the joy within yourself and
amor fati, accepting fate.
Yeah.
And then appreciating what you have.
Not depending on external factors to make you happy. Like you have to be happy with yourself. Yeah.
And back to the luxurious living. So it all connects. So if you were reliant upon luxurious living for your happiness, and then suddenly you're exiled, or maybe you, to put it into the modern day example that he uses, Irvine, if maybe you're wealthy, but you're getting old and you have, trouble taking care of yourself and you need assistance and your family puts you in a nursing home.
Yeah.
I don't even know how all that works. Like, when can a family just put their, elder into a nursing home? I don't know how that all works. Do they have to be proven to be incapable? I don't know. But if you're used to a certain way of life, maybe it's luxurious, and then suddenly your family insists that, hey, we can't take care of you. We need to put you in this nursing home for daily care. If you're reliant upon that luxury living for your happiness, then that's going to be
you're not going to be happy anymore. Yeah.
There's going to be a challenge regardless. But if you're not prepared for that and you don't know how to deal with that by looking around at your life from time to time, doing the meditation practice and the Seneca version of experimenting with going camping and, wearing rough clothes and being dirty from time to time, then you're going to struggle. So, dying on a good end to a good life. Back to negative visualization. A lot of it comes back to that.
It really does. Yeah.
It's supposed to be used not only for losing others, but for learning to appreciate your own life. And then there's a chapter called On Becoming a Stoic. Start now and prepare to be mocked.
I like the very first bit of advice is to become a stealth Stoic. Don't tell anyone. He's not out there trying to spread the word about how great it is to become a Stoic. It's like, if you want to do this, don't tell anyone you're doing it. Okay.
Yeah, I wrote that down. He says, by practicing Stoicism stealthily, you gain or you can gain its benefits while avoiding one significant cost: the teasing and outright mockery of your friends, relatives, neighbors, and coworkers.
I just can't imagine saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to start practicing Stoicism." I don't imagine her reaction would be, "Ha, that's so stupid."
Yeah, it struck me as a little bit extreme of a take on it,
Mockery.
maybe.
And yeah, I don't think everyone out there is like bagging on stoicists. I don't think anyone's
Stoicists?
stoicist. Is that a word? Stoics.
Stoics.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. I think people would just be like, "Oh, okay, cool." Like, I don't think it would cause as much disruption as he thinks.
More indifference than anything.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's his recommendation.
Okay.
And then he goes on for his advice for practicing Stoicism.
Yeah.
Is when beginning as a Stoic, this is actually in part 4, I think.
Yeah,
Stoicism.
part 4.
Well, the chapter that I just read was part 3, Stoic advice on becoming a Stoic.
Oh.
And I don't remember what he says in that one, but he does mention prepare to be mocked in the title of that. But then in part 4, he has his practicing Stoicism chapter.
Okay.
Where he really goes into his specific recommendations.
That's where he says start with negative visualization. Once you feel like you've mastered that, move on to the trichotomy of control. It kind of goes in order from.
Yeah, he says don't try to master all the techniques at once. Mm-hmm. Start with one until you're proficient and then move on to the next. Yeah. Yep. And then he talks about, also in part 4, Stoicism for Modern Lives is a chapter, the decline of Stoicism. And that's where he talks about, because this was in 2009, he wrote the book. And I don't remember when Ryan Holiday started writing his books on Stoicism, but I believe it was after that. Because he talks about how Marcus Aurelius was really the last, what he called a charismatic leader or practicing charismatic leader of Stoicism, I guess.
Yeah.
And how for a long time there hasn't been anybody kind of leading the way. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'd be interested to see his opinion on, is he considered like Ryan Holiday? I don't know if you know anything about him. Mm-mm. To be
that charismatic figure of, yeah.
I would say he's definitely brought it back in many ways. I don't know if there's other people that have besides him. And like I said, Tim Ferriss has also talked a lot about Stoicism. And we also we had an episode on Derek Sivers, who is the founder of CD Baby, the music distribution company. But he said that he had what he thought was his own unique way of thinking and doing life.
Yeah. And
then discovered that a lot of the things that he kind of stumbled upon on his own were Stoic ideas, and realized he was kind of a practicing Stoic in much the way you just said a little bit ago, that I think I am a Stoic. You do some things that the Stoics
certainly
advise.
Some things, not all of them. But the ones that I don't do, I think have value and are good. I didn't have a lot of problems with Stoicism. Like, there was nothing that I was like, I don't know, that sounds...
There was one thing that I'll remind you of, because...
Oh, I do know one. Is it sex?
No.
They kind of talk about...
they talk about chastity, and they advise not having sex before marriage.
Yeah.
And then even after marriage,
only to procreate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
And that's kind of like the luxurious living. There were some differences of opinions on that, depending on which philosopher, Stoic philosopher you were listening to.
But that one, I was kind of like, well, you're not going to get a huge following with that being the...
Yeah. And then there's a lot of Stoic philosophers that committed suicide.
Oh, yeah. Well, and he did touch on that at the end. And he said, though, he doesn't know for sure if it was a higher incidence at the time, because maybe that was just more the norm given the time in history.
Yeah, he pointed out...
He didn't say it was a disproportionate amount of Stoics that were committing suicide. And he also said that they were committing suicide when they were old.
Yeah, it wasn't like I'm happy or I'm in my 30s and healthy otherwise, but Stoicism isn't working for me, so I'm going to kill myself.
No, it was like they were at the decline in life or already very sick and didn't want to prolong their life. So
it sounds like in many cases there were elements of physical suffering. They weren't just depressed. Right. It wasn't a mental anguish suicide. It was a suicide of practicality for...
Yeah, like a clear-headed intention of...
And let me say that this is not a...
I'm not pro, like, any kind of suicide.
Like, oh, that seems like...
No. But
not at all.
The way that it was explained in the book, it was...
Different times.
Lack
of medical...
health care that we have now.
Care, yeah. So how much... Once you know it's you know you're gonna die and you're suffering, I think it was more of a quick solution.
Sure, I mean,
when the inevitable outcome is already determined in some cases.
Yeah.
I don't think that was all the
Always,
situations,
no,
but that was one thing that I can see as a major criticism. Like, well, why are these Stoics killing themselves if this is so effective? So that didn't sway me away from any of the other advice. The other advice I think can be separated from that and still, like, it's pretty clearly good advice.
Yeah, and I was gonna say with that, I didn't get the sense of if you don't practice this part of Stoicism, then you might as well not practice any of it. It was kind of like, here's these 8 to 10 principles. It didn't say you must do them all. It just, here they are, and this hopefully will lead to a life of tranquility and less negative emotion. So I think you can kind of pick from it what works for you to get to the same outcome.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it. The goal is, at least for the Roman Stoics, tranquility. So that is, in its simplest sense, just a lack of negative emotion or a lack of being affected by
negative emotion.
Because sometimes they might pop up, but if you're prepared for them with negative visualization or any of the other tools, then you can kind of squash them or not let them interrupt your tranquility.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all I got.
So are you a practicing Stoic?
I
this
can't
the way
say
to live?
that. Is it the way to live? I think it's a good way to live.
Okay.
I would put it up there at the top.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't call myself a practicing Stoic, but definitely...
Because you don't want to be mocked.
Yeah. Don't want to be mocked. But yeah, definitely going to... I mean, I've been reading about Stoicism for a while.
Yeah.
So it's hard to put into practice if you don't do the daily work, I think. Like anything else, it's just, you have to, if you really want to put it into play in your life, you have to do the hard work part of it, which is the daily looking back and saying, okay. And eventually it'll become more ingrained if you're doing a daily meditation journal and saying, okay, was not Stoic here, was Stoic here.
Yeah.
But, so no, I haven't done that kind of work. So without doing that kind of work, I don't think I can say, maybe some people can do it more easily than I, but not a practicing Stoic yet, but open to becoming.
Cool.
So yeah, I think it's a good way to live.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. And please tune in next week for another edition of A Million Ways to Live. Bye-bye.